Samantha's little heart raced as she watched her mother, Mrs. Hall, prepare breakfast. There was a stillness about her, a rigidity that hadn't been there before her week-long retreat to the mountains. It was the way she chopped vegetables, her hands mechanically moving like a wind-up doll, and her smile too stretched, too insistent. "Honey, don't you like the eggs?" Mrs. Hall's voice was mellifluous, but it lacked warmth. "They taste different," Samantha mumbled, pushing them around her plate. Mrs. Hall's eyes lingered on Samantha for a second too long. "Well, I tried a new recipe, dear. A change is always good, isn't it?" Samantha looked down. Those weren't her mother's eyes. They were a shade darker, colder, like deep pools you could drown in. When her father, Mr. Hall, kissed Mrs. Hall goodbye for work, Samantha noticed they didn't share their usual morning banter. Instead, Mrs. Hall simply watched him with that new, unsettling gaze, lips curved in a perpetual smile. As soon as he left, Mrs. Hall turned to Samantha. "Why don't we play a game, dear?" she suggested. Samantha hesitated. "I have homework." Mrs. Hall's smile widened, teeth shining unnaturally white against her pale skin. "Homework can wait." Over the next few days, Samantha's suspicions grew. The house was always cold, regardless of the heating. The plants, which her mother tended to with love, began to wither. The pet cat, Mr. Whiskers, had been missing since the day her mother returned. One evening, as Samantha lay in bed, she heard a soft, eerie humming. It sounded familiar, yet strange, like her mother's lullaby but distorted. She followed the sound and found Mrs. Hall standing in the dark in the middle of the living room, her silhouette barely visible, swaying slightly. Terrified, Samantha ran to her room, diving under the covers. She missed her real mother, the warmth of her hug, the genuine laughter they shared. This imposter, this doppelganger, was stealing those memories from her. She decided to confide in her father. That night, as Mr. Hall read her a bedtime story, Samantha interrupted. "Daddy, is something wrong with Mommy?" Mr. Hall frowned. "Why do you ask, sweetie?" "She's not the same. She looks like her, but she's different inside. Can't you see it?" Mr. Hall sighed, brushing her hair softly. "Your mom's just tired from her trip. Give her some time. Everything will be back to normal soon." But Samantha persisted. "Promise me you'll be careful, Daddy. Promise." He chuckled, squeezing her hand. "I promise." The next day, while Mrs. Hall was in the shower, Samantha sneaked into her room. She remembered the horror stories her friends shared about doppelgangers. They said the real person would be hidden somewhere, waiting to be rescued. She had to find a clue. Her search led her to her mother's suitcase from the trip. It was strangely light, but as she unzipped it, a foul odor hit her. Inside was only a bundle of old, rotting clothes. Definitely not what her mother had packed. Suddenly she felt a presence behind her. She turned slowly, coming face to face with Mrs. Hall, her hair dripping wet, eyes boring into Samantha. "Looking for something?" Her voice was cold and mocking. Samantha, paralyzed with fear, managed to stammer, "Where's my real mommy?" Mrs. Hall chuckled, a sound devoid of joy. "You won't find her, dear. Not in time." As Mrs. Hall advanced, the front door banged open. Mr. Hall, looking frantic, rushed in holding a talisman. "Stay away from my daughter!" Mrs. Hall hissed, recoiling. "She figured it out, didn't she? I couldn't fool her." Mr. Hall nodded. "She's smarter than you thought. Now tell me where my wife is." Cornered, the imposter's form began to warp and shift, her skin becoming translucent, revealing a shadowy form beneath. With a sigh of defeat, she whispered the location of the real Mrs. Hall. Hours later, they found her, weak but alive, trapped in a cabin near the retreat. The doppelganger, a spirit from local legend, had lured her, hoping to take over her life. Back home, as the family held each other tight, Samantha whispered, "I knew it wasn't you, Mommy. I just knew." Mrs. Hall kissed her forehead. "Always trust your instincts, sweetie. They might just save us all." The night was still, but somewhere in the distance an eerie hum lingered, a reminder that the unknown was never too far away.
Janine had always been envious of Jessica. They were twins, identical in every way, but it felt as if life had handed Jessica everything on a silver platter. Wealth, a doting husband, beautiful children, while Janine struggled to keep her life together. It wasn't just jealousy, it was a burning resentment that consumed her every thought. One stormy night, Janine saw her opportunity. She orchestrated an accident for herself, making it look as though she had been swept away by the river during a walk. Everyone believed Janine was dead, and her heart swelled with triumph as she watched her own funeral from a distance. After ensuring that enough time had passed, Janine approached her sister, pretending to be a ghost. "You need to disappear for a while. Let the family heal. Go away, and when the time is right, I will tell you when to come back," she whispered to a terrified Jessica one night. Out of fear and the seemingly supernatural event, Jessica did as she was told, leaving her life behind. Janine smoothly transitioned into Jessica's life. She moved in, comforting Jessica's grieving husband and children, assuring them that everything would be all right. At first, the switch was exhilarating. The luxury, the love, the respect. It was everything Janine had yearned for. However, not long after settling into her new life, Janine began to see her reflection behaving oddly. Whenever she looked in a mirror, she would see Jessica's face instead of her own, her eyes filled with anger and accusation. One evening, as Janine bathed Jessica's youngest child, she heard a soft whisper behind her. "Imposter," it hissed. Turning around, she saw a dripping wet version of herself, no, of Jessica, standing there, water pooling around her feet, her eyes devoid of warmth. Panicking, Janine rushed out of the bathroom, leaving the child in the tub. She avoided mirrors and reflective surfaces, fearing the accusatory stare of the twin she had wronged. She began to see Jessica everywhere, in shadows, in dreams, in the corner of her eyes. Sleep became elusive for Janine. Every time she closed her eyes, she would see Jessica's face, hear her voice crying for justice. There was no escape from the haunting figure, a constant reminder of the life she had stolen. One night, after weeks of being tormented, Janine heard a knock on her bedroom door. Assuming it was one of the children or perhaps her husband, she opened it, only to find Jessica standing there dripping wet, just as she had been the night Janine last saw her alive. "Give me back my life," Jessica hissed, reaching out to grab Janine. In a blind panic, Janine pushed Jessica away, causing her to fall down the stairs. She rushed to the landing, expecting to find Jessica's broken body, but there was nothing there, just an empty staircase. Confused and terrified, Janine ran outside, desperate to escape the house and the haunting visions of her twin. The rain was pouring heavily, just like the night she faked her death. She decided to visit the very spot by the river where it all began, hoping to find some closure. As Janine stood by the river's edge, the rain drenching her, she felt a strong force push her from behind. She plunged into the water, gasping for air as the cold currents pulled her under. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was Jessica's face, mirroring her own terror as they both drowned in their shared fate. The next morning, the town was abuzz with the news. Jessica's body was found by the river, just days after the tragic accident that had claimed Janine. The family mourned the loss of both twins, never knowing the dark secrets that lay beneath the surface.
It was a sensation overnight. A viral social media app, Reflect, boasted a unique algorithm that matched users to their global doppelgangers. At first, it was merely a quirky novelty, and timelines were flooded with side-by-side pictures of strangers with uncanny resemblances. Anna, ever curious about tech trends, decided to try it out. She uploaded a picture, waited for the spinning wheel to finish its process, and gasped as she saw her mirror image staring back. The resemblance was eerie. The other woman even had the same dimple on her left cheek. Her lookalike's name was Elara, and she lived in a remote town in Eastern Europe. Anna promptly took a screenshot and shared it with her friends, receiving a flurry of comments about how they could be twins. A couple of days later, Anna received a notification. Elara had sent her a private message. "It's uncanny, isn't it? How much we look alike. Do you think there's a deeper connection? Perhaps from past lives?" Anna, amused, replied, "Maybe. It's super cool, though. It's like finding a long-lost twin." Their chat was casual and lighthearted, but Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something about Elara was off. She pushed the thought aside, blaming her overactive imagination. One morning, Anna's phone buzzed with a flurry of messages from Elara. "I can't stop thinking about our connection. What if we were meant to meet? I have this overwhelming urge to see you, Anna. Anna was taken aback. It was one thing to chat about similarities, but this felt intrusive. Deciding it was best to distance herself, Anna stopped replying. Weeks went by and the initial craze of Reflect started to fade. But then, a news article changed everything. Reflect app turns deadly. Lookalike found dead in what seems to be a ritualistic killing. The article explained that several users had reported being stalked by their doppelgangers, with one tragic result. The app was quickly pulled from all platforms, but for many, the damage was done. Anna tried to shake her unease, but one evening as she returned home, she found her front door ajar. Panic rose as she cautiously stepped inside, noting the shattered vase on the floor. She reached for her phone to call the police, but it buzzed in her hand. A message from Elara. Almost there. She realized with growing dread that Elara had tracked her down. Racing upstairs, she locked herself in her room. From the window, she saw a figure approaching, moving oddly, jerkily. As it came into the light, Anna gasped. It was Elara, or something that looked like her, but her eyes were vacant, her mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. A soft whisper came from behind Anna, making her freeze. "I wanted to be closer to you." She slowly turned around to find another Elara standing behind her, mirroring her every move. Anna's mind raced. She needed to escape. She lunged for the door, but the doppelganger was faster, grabbing her wrist with an iron grip. Anna's scream was cut short as she stared into eyes that were a reflection of her own, but devoid of any humanity. Hours later, the police found the house in disarray. Anna was missing, and all that remained was a chilling message on the mirror. "Now we are one." As the news of Anna's disappearance spread, more reports poured in of doppelgangers stalking their lookalikes. It became clear that Reflect wasn't just matching faces. It was releasing something far more sinister. The line between the digital world and reality had been terrifyingly blurred, and a darkness had been unleashed.